Oh, howdy all, grab yourself a drink. It is time for some PathOfExile discussion. Welcome to day 14 of the Laker Kalandra League, and there's a whole bunch of responses by GGG to an amount of player feedback. Some of this is going to be agreeing with people, some of it is going to be explaining their reasons for disagreeing, but let's go through it all. Firstly, Arch Nemesis. Let's start with what's missing here, and that is anything about Hasted. Hasted is the one Arch Nemesis modifier that I think is still genuinely overpowered. It's not overpowered on every single monster, it's only overpowered on naturally fast monsters, but when it does spawn on those, it can feel really brutal. Most of the times that people are dying to Arch Nemesis monsters when it's not a telegraph slam attack, so it's not like they're being killed by a magma barrier or something like that. Most of the time it involves Hasted on a fast monster, and it's not necessarily a one-shot, it's usually a 1, 2, 3 punch where they've died very quickly to it. So Hasted, I think, needs a look. Anyways, in terms of the things that are being changed, Heralding Minions comes up first. This is the one that causes those lightning totems to spawn. This is one of the most dangerous of the modifiers, and it is being removed entirely from the Delve mines. This is a really good call because it's one of those things that does not play well with Delve. The reason for this is that Heralding Minions persist. Heralding Minions will continue to follow you for the entirety of that Delve section, and usually if you find yourself in a situation where the monster that had Heralding Minions is earlier in the crawl, and you can't get back to it safely, then your best bet is just to log out. And that's really unsatisfying and something that I think will not be missed by anyone. So this one's going to be changed in an upcoming patch. This is not live yet. Community feedback reports that Arch Nemesis modifiers that convert rewards to quality, currency, and flasks feel bad. We're discussing this internally, nothing to report yet, but internal discussion suggests there's a fair bit of team agreement about it feeling bad. This is Necromancer and Droughtbringer. Necromancer turns all of the rewards from that monster into either Blacksmith's Whetstones or Armorer's Scraps. It may also be able to drop Cartographer's Chisels, I don't know. Likewise, Gemcutter Prisms might be able to drop, but I haven't seen them. Then there's Droughtbringer, which turns everything into flasks. The thing with the flasks is quite interesting, in that this Droughtbringer mod has completely flooded the market for item level 85 plus Quicksilver flasks, Jade flasks, and the like. Things that in previous leagues have actually sold pretty well. But in this league, they're completely worthless, and that's because Droughtbringer is putting so many of them into the trade league economy. This is something that comes up a lot with trade leagues, where when something has its drop rate buffed, even if it is through some indirect mechanic like this, it can end up just suppressing the value of that item completely. I think that these conversions could just be limited to one item. There's also the ones that convert into jewels and jewelry, and they could potentially be one item only as well. The main thing you don't want to see is a situation where you would have had something that's a useful currency item drop, even at the low end, something like a Chaos Orb or an Awakened Sextant, that then gets converted into a pile of 20 Blacksmith's Whetstones that you don't even bother picking up at all. Even if it was just a rare gold ring your filter wouldn't have shown that gets converted into this, you always feel like it could have been something better. So that's why I think they should change this, and like I say, changing it so that it's only one pile would solve everything there. As we mentioned in our last post, some players have noted that they prefer item drops to have less variance, i.e. fewer big spikes of valuable rewards, with the rewards averaged out across more encounters. This is something we're still discussing. Here I think there is a difference between different groups of players. There are people like me who can get a Mage Blood if they want to over a league. For people like us, the threshold for a drop to make you go, oh wow, is usually something like an Apothecary. Then there's the oh cool threshold, which is something more like getting a Doctor. And then there's the oh yeah, that's just a routine cool drop, which is something like a Divine Orb or maybe even a Cortex. Then there's a much larger group of players for whom a Doctor level drop is an oh wow moment, a Divine Orb or a Cortex is an oh cool moment, and then something that's like around 40C can be more of a routine good drop. I think the current system with currency conversion on Arch Nemesis is producing more moments for people like me at the expense of that other group of players. Whilst I'm fine with this personally, I don't think it's necessarily a good direction for the game, and I think it would be a good idea to reduce some of this spikiness and make it so that the extreme jackpot drops, and here we're talking 4 Arch Nemesis monsters with 1 of Solaris, Lunaris, and Shakira touched, as well as Opulent. Make it so that these mega jackpots are a much smaller percentage of the total currency within a league. So also address some of the problems where people feel the need to bring in a Magic Find color against certain monster combinations. So yeah, this is one of those situations where you can't please everyone, and it's probably best to aim to please the group for whom a Doctor is an oh wow moment, even though that's not necessarily as good for someone like me. Also mentioned in our last post was that monsters that can't drop items shouldn't have large numbers of Arch Nemesis mods and will be capped at 2 mods. This has happened internally and will be deployed in an upcoming patch. I really hope that this also extends to cases like the Katava fights, Belfry map boss, and the Lava Lake map boss. These are in a pretty silly state at the moment when you get a 3 or 4 mod Arch Nemesis in there that spawns in the middle, especially if they're one of the monsters that has a large area control effect. So we're talking things here like Temporal Bubble, Magma Barrier, Mana Siphoner, and the like, things that cause you to move to certain places in order to be safe. These play really badly with bosses that are in tight areas. I really think a pass should be done through the various Arch Nemesis mods to decide which mods don't play well with bosses, and then potentially for rares that spawn during boss fights, they should have a restricted list of Arch Nemesis modifiers. This would mean no Temporal Bubble, no Magma Barrier, and the like. Also, they'd be capped at 2 mods in normal situations as well. So that's not mentioned here, and I think that's something that should be added in. That was something that was discussed earlier. We're also aware of feedback around monsters applying permanent marks feeling frustrating, particularly in the context of the Arch Nemesis modifier Deadeye, and also in Delve, but in other areas of the game. This has some technical complications around it that make it tricky to improve, but it's something we'll be working on. You'll probably solve this by changing marks away from being permanent, making them 3 minutes by default, i.e. that's effectively permanent when players use them, and then have a situation where marks aren't refreshed unless they're under 10 seconds duration left, and marks expire on players much faster than normal. That would solve a lot of these issues. Then you could have a mark that lands on a player, perhaps it expires in 12 seconds on a player. That's not going to feel unfair when you get marked during a delve. Alternately though, you could just remove Deadeye from the list of mods that can spawn in Delve, and that would solve that problem as well, same as you dealt with heralding minions earlier. Essentially, permanent effects that endure as long as the monster survives are really bad in Delve, and that's something that has come up a couple of times here. Next, there's a Kalandra League content. In the Lake of Kalandra, rock formations don't allow you to hide from enemy attacks. This has been fixed internally and will be deployed in an upcoming patch. This is genuinely really good change. I like the ability to outplay content that you don't outgear. This is something that will help that become more of a reality. Players have mentioned that when Beyond appears in the Lake of Kalandra, its difficulty to reward ratio doesn't feel right. That is an understatement if ever I've seen one. We're investigating this. Basically, the thing here is that Beyond's rewards are ordinary, and the danger is pretty extraordinary. This applies to Breach as well. Breach is extremely dangerous in the Lake of Kalandra and has very ordinary rewards, as does Beyond as well. So these are the two that come to mind as some of the most nasty of the mechanics there. Much of the community's feedback this leak has focused on the rewards coming from the Lake of Kalandra. We're making the Reflecting Mist 50% more common whilst also assessing other item drops. Currently we feel general drops from the lake are okay, but the past league content that appears in the lake might not be rewarding enough. We're keen for specific feedback around which past league encounters in the lake don't feel quite right in terms of rewards. Please include as much detail as possible about your experiences. So my experience here is that I would much rather open a weapons chest in a heist than I would open a weapons chest in the Lake of Kalandra, even if that Lake of Kalandra weapons chest is quite late along. And that's because if I open one in a Lake of Kalandra, let's say it's a difficulty 8 tile, what I'm going to get is 15 rare items plus one thing that might be a bit more special, like a fractured weapon. If I open a weapons chest in a heist at the same monster level, then I'll get some divination cards that are related to unique weapons. I'll get a bunch of currency that modifies sockets, and I might get a couple of unusual weapons as well, things like fractured and synthesized items. So they feel much better than the ones in the Lake of Kalandra, even though the lake ones vomit out more items in general. That's something I think that GGG could look at. Then we have the past league encounters. We've already talked about Breach. Breach is way harder than the rewards would indicate. Legion is also one that feels pretty anemic to get in there, and I don't usually pick it. I would usually pick just a generic encounter over a Legion because of that in the lake. And next we get to harvest crafting, which is going to annoy a lot of people, but that there is a pretty smart solution to something that is going to be raised here. Firstly, there's a quality of life change. The amount of life force that you've got of each type will be visible on the Hoarder crafting station. Next, we're aware there's a lot of disappointment around certain harvest crafts being removed. Previously, harvest craft was balanced by how difficult it was to get the crafts you want. Now the crafts are tradable. Harvest power was reduced to be more in line with other crafting methods. We understand there's a call for us to bring those crafts back, but it isn't really possible whilst allowing harvest to remain tradable. This was always going to be the case. Things like reforge keep prefixes, we always knew that these would be gone if they were made tradable, because ultimately the balancing act in the past was that reforge keep suffixes was something that a power gamer could only realistically use maybe 20 times an hour when they're trying to craft something. And this put severe restrictions on mass production crafting and how much the mass production crafters could buy up these particular crafts because it took so much time and there was a whole lot of other stuff going on. Now that they're tradable, that's no longer the case. If you made it so that 1,000 blue life force paid for a reforge keep prefixes, then at that point you have set the value of blue life force. All other blue life force crafts become worthless to use. The only correct use of blue life force then is to use reforge keep prefixes. And if you find blue life force and you don't have a good target for reforge keep prefixes, the only thing you should really do with it is sell it to someone that can afford to use it well. That's the situation that happened with augments in the past. The augments were so rare that people would sell them to the small number of people that could afford to buy them and use them perfectly. And that's the case if those crafts were to be returned. And people knew that before Harvest was made tradable. Like, we always knew. GGG had always been really transparent on that. If this was ever made tradable, then some of the things would have to go. That was clearly going to be one of the things. So yeah, this is definitely never going to change. Those crafts are gone, they're not coming back, and I think we all knew that was going to be the case. While this isn't exactly what you want to hear, I can say this issue was pushed very hard during discussions to see if any compromise could be made, and a compromise of sorts was found, which we'll come to in a sec. Eldritch currency. We're making it so that Eldritch Exalts, Eldritch Chaos, and Eldritch Annuls will drop in lower area levels and buffing their drop rate. These currency items are intended to fulfill similar functions to some of the removed Harvest crafts, i.e. reforge keep prefixes, reforge keep suffixes, though we're aware they can only be applied to certain items, and are still discussing whether similar solutions for other gear slots are appropriate. I think that this is the right solution here. This allows reforge keep prefixes to be available, and because the ceiling on these is a little bit lower, you're not able to use it to perfect a double elevated item like you could with Harvest Reforge Keep. This actually means that they are more able to be used by ordinary players, because if you had access to something that was tradable that could be used on a double elevated item, your correct thing you should do with it is sell it to someone that can use it better than you can. They're also considering whether there will be some similar solutions for other gear slots. This, I think, is a really good idea. If they had something that could be used on non-influenced weapons in particular, a surgical annul that could only hit prefixes, or another one that could only hit suffixes, and that was exclusive to weapons, that would solve a lot of problems here as well. Anyways, that's all we've got here. May your Eldritch currency orbs have interesting results, and I will see you around.